This wooden chapel on the estate of Holston Hall is a bit of an eye-catcher in an 18th century landscape garden. But there are clues that suggest a medieval history that may go way back. Now, records suggest that somewhere in this area stood an important medieval preceptory, a sort of monastic settlement created for the Knights Hospitallers to raise money for the Crusades. But where exactly it stood, no one knows. On one of his early morning walks, Stewart became absolutely convinced that he could see the preceptory here in the lumps and bumps of this landscape. In fact, he's even drawn us a little map.
And we've got the local community behind us, we brought all the time team together, we've even got an audience of cows to watch, and we've only got 3 days to do it.
Only one preceptory has been fully excavated, so this is both a massive challenge and a golden opportunity. So we brought a huge team of archaeologists, experts and volunteers, and we'll be using all the latest technology as well as some more down-to-earth techniques.
Life has just never been more glamorous.
To find out whether this is the important medieval site that Stewart thinks it is. Holston Hall lies a mile or so from Whittington Castle, a marcher castle fought over by the Welsh and English during the medieval period. In the 12th century, Lord of Whittington, Roger de Powys, granted a portion of this land to the Knights Hospitallers, and over the course of a century, it expanded to be the most important Knights Hospitallers site in the north of England and Wales. So what attracted you to this site, Stuart?
Well, I was asked to look at the lumps and bumps of the castle in Whittington, which were interesting enough, and I thought, oh, there's a great opportunity for a community landscape archaeology project. So I started to look at the LiDAR of the area, and on it I saw that, which is a wonderful rectangular-ish enclosure formed by ditches. We're walking along one of these ditches now. To me, this sort of classic medieval moated site, which I wasn't expecting to find.
But those lumps and bumps, what convinced you that they're medieval and that it wasn't just an 18th century landscape? You seem pretty confident about this, Stuart, though.
Well, fingers crossed, but I am reasonably confident, and if we're right, I might just buy John Gator a drink.
Wow, that is quite something. John's Geophys team have already been hard at work scanning the area inside the enclosure for signs of buildings. So, John, I think Stuart's promising you a drink.
Oh, telltale.
So, how are you going to find me a preceptory?
Well, it's all here.
It's all here?
Yeah. Well, we've actually gone in and done some magnetics, and they agree totally with Stewart's earthworks. We've got lots of targets within the earthworks, and we've done a small amount of radar, and if you look at the radar results, look, we've got such a clear structure there on the outside of this wall.
That's just on the edge of that earthwork platform there, John, that sort of flat area out there that you can see.
Yes,
yeah.
It's actually outside by the look of it.
Right.
That is an ideal target.
It's in the centre of the enclosure. It's where you might expect buildings to be. So
oh, really?
We've got targets everywhere in here. Why don't we just get on with it then? Because it's not going to stay dry for the rest of the shoot, is it?
So with rain forecast and so much potential in the site, Matt gets going in trench 1.
Just do a little bit further back, and then we'll take the topsoil off, and then we'll do the subsoil, and then we'll move back.
But will these features prove to be a medieval preceptory or 18th century garden landscaping?
I mean, there's no structures in there, but there's a lot of brick rubble. There's a tile there, possibly some building stone.
So it looks like we're into the archaeology, but bricks suggest we're a few hundred years later than the Preceptory. The Knights Hospitallers combined the life of a monk with that of a knight. In around 1070, they were founded as a hospital in Jerusalem to provide hospitality, medical care for the sick, poor and injured pilgrims to the Holy Land. But after the First Crusade in 1099, they found themselves increasingly embroiled in battle.
This whole region is now under Christian control, but most of the Crusaders then just go home, so there's a big manpower shortage. So you then have groups like the Hospitallers and like the Templars taking on a military role, where they're going to combine the life of being a monk, praying, charity, with that of a knight, in that they fight to defend the pilgrims, but also to defend the Crusader states themselves by joining the new kingdom's armies.
Why did they become powerful in Britain? Why would anybody support that going on such a long way away?
Because the idea of crusading becomes really important to medieval European society. If you are a nobleman, if you're a king, this is the sort of thing that you're expected to engage in, at least in some way. Maybe you don't have to go all the way out to Jerusalem. A way that you can show support for crusade instead is you can give some land to the Hospitallers.
So Holston is just a little tiny cell in an enormous international organisation in the 12th century and onwards.
Yes, it is a link to the rest of the world going through this. And money from here and people recruited here can then find themselves in Jerusalem or later in Rhodes or Malta.
Bit of glass as well. Really, really, really thin window glass.
In Trench 1, Matt's already onto the remains of some sort of building.
We've got bits of brick there.
Yep.
I don't know how they compare to the stuff in the church. Bits of stone. I don't know. I thought that was mortar, but is it?
Let's have a look. I think that's from a lath and plaster, either a ceiling or a partition.
So that would be inside a building. That's the kind of smooth surface that you would see.
Yeah, 'cause these indents here would be where the wooden laths were, that this would be sort of shoved up against. So it can either be a ceiling if it's that way up, and if it's that way up, it's going to be on a partition. So either way, we can't really tell at the moment, but it's been lime washed, so it's pretty high status bit of kit that. So is that a bit of glass there, Matt?
Yeah, very, very thin, delicate bit of glass.
Extremely thin.
Isn't that beautiful?
It is. It's miniature, isn't it? A bit of glass like that with a shimmery rainbow effect on it.
So we're getting a sense of a building, but what sort of period would it have been?
It's difficult to tell at the moment. We've got all the bits, but not in the right order at the moment. We've got brick, we've got plaster, we've got glass. So we're not looking at anything that's going to be medieval or anything like that. It's going to be post-medieval, so we're probably looking at something way after the Preceptory.
But that's where I come in, because I think what we need to do here is clear away all this brick, all this later rubble. You can see the edge of the building there. We might get some structure underneath it, we might get foundations, we might even get a floor, but who knows, beneath that, there might be something to do with the Preceptory.
Fingers crossed.
As part of our investigations, we're creating a digital timeline for this site. And records suggest that our story starts in the 11th century when our Preceptory was founded. But one of the most valuable sources of information about what we might find in the ground is an inventory created in 1338.
It's a list of all the income and expenses for Holston and all the lands that it controls. These are all of its properties in North Wales. So Holston doesn't actually start until all the way down here, and you can just make out Holston written
with
at
the
the
long
side
S,
there.
yes, yes.
And then these two lines give a description of the actual buildings at the site. So you've got the messuage, which is just a house, and that's for hosting the Hospitallers living here, and then also anyone else who might come and visit. And also it has a garden, which you've got just there, and a dovecot. So each entry, as well as listing all their property and their finances, also lists the staff for the Preceptory and gives us the names of the actual Hospitallers living at the site. So we've got names of the two resident Hospitallers at the bottom here.
You're going to have to read those out to me. I cannot work those out.
So the first one is Brother Philip de Luder, and he's a preceptor and a sergeant.
Yes, right. So what's a sergeant?
So sergeants are a mixture of people who might still fight, or they might be more sort of administrators, but the important thing is that they're not of knightly birth, so they're lower in rank. And then below we've got Brother Albinus, which we'd probably translate as Aubrey de Neville, and he's also a sergeant.
Wow.
It's fantastic to have the names of preceptors who lived at Holston in 1338. But the icing on the cake would be to find evidence in the ground of where and how they lived.
Good to go, John?
Trench 2's going in over another feature in the geophys, which John hopes could be one of the buildings mentioned in the inventory.
Some building stone, probably. Just in the topsoil, so we can keep going now. Just a little bit deeper.
The chapel at the centre of the enclosure is a very unusual wooden structure, but we're not sure whether it dates back to the time of the Preceptory or whether it's a later addition. Adams used aerial photogrammetry to create a 3D model to help our investigations. And Richard Morris, our buildings expert, has already spotted signs that it might be earlier than we thought.
That is just, if it is what I think it is, it's quite astonishing. That looks like a Saxon font to me.
Saxon font?
Saxon.
Yeah.
And what sort of date range would you put on there?
I would have thought 10th century, that kind of
So that's
date.
way before the Preceptory was
yes,
here.
yeah.
I mean, what's that doing here?
Have you identified any carvings or any patterning?
Only on the base, which seems to be a separate thing altogether. If you look on this side, the base,
yeah.
very
yes.
rich decoration on
Yeah.
there. There's some patterning on here, which
yeah,
could be
I see.
natural or it could be, real. I don't know.
We have a few techniques we could probably apply to this and allow us to 3D model it and try and tease out a bit of information.
That would be interesting.
See if there's anything on there.
I mean, that would be very useful.
So is there anything else in here that's caught your eye?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, it's lined with wainscot at the moment, and that's been dated to various dates by people. One of the common dates is 1725, and that's because of the date on that coat of arms on the pulpit. But the pulpit wainscot doesn't look anything like the rest of the wainscot. This looks much earlier, probably early 17th century.
No, I can't help but notice as we came in there was something else.
There was something else, wasn't there?
So what do you think of this, Richard?
It's rather great, isn't it? I mean, this is a genuine medieval stone tomb, and this has got to belong to the Hospitallers.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a classic sort of, that kind of thing you get in monasteries and abbeys all over the place, and this is, nobody's going to drag this from anywhere else to this place. So I think that's going to be a genuine Hospitaller coffin, stone coffin.
Incredible. So this is a medieval stone sarcophagus, you think, for this site?
Yeah.
Perhaps one of the preceptors or knights was buried inside this coffin. But was this the chapel that he would have worshipped in, and which was mentioned in the 1338 inventory? Or is it something later?
But the one thing we're looking at, you've only got the one door at the moment at the west end through that 18th century tower. So we're looking to see whether there are any more doorways. If you look in this particular bay here, you'll see these are concrete.
Yeah.
But then if you look there, you've got a lot of peg holes. And if you look at those peg holes and the pattern, and in the middle, you've got a little indent there into the sole plate. And if you look back, you'll see in the plinth a vertical break there and a vertical break there.
Yeah.
So I think all this has been rebuilt, and that's where the original door was.
Do you know what? I'd never have recognised that if you hadn't pointed it out. That's amazing.
So, I mean, the importance of that is you've got a doorway here that goes into the internal decoration of a chapel, which 17th century panelling.
Aha.
So this doorway has to predate the 17th century panelling.
So it seems the Holston Chapel has a complex history stretching further back than first look suggested. We're using laser scanners to hunt for evidence of the original chapel gifted to the Hospitallers in the 11th century and used by them throughout the medieval period.
Richard,
Nice bit of stone.
just the man.
And back in Trench 2, Stewart thinks he might have found a nice chunky bit of medieval building.
It's
that
just
little indent.
It's been broken off something here.
Yeah.
And if that was stood up like that, you can.
What, you think of an arched head or something? Yeah.
I think it's got a bit of shape. Don't you?
Yeah, I can see something, but I worry that I'm just sort of casting my own particular hopes onto a lump of stone. But
So what do you think?
Well, it's not. It doesn't look like it's an erratic of any description. It looks like it's being worked for something, but whether it's being worked as a nice carved piece of decoration is a bit tricky to tell because we haven't got much of it left, have we?
This is the sort of thing you might expect with a medieval.
Certainly, I mean, I would imagine that's going to be medieval, whether it's worked stone per se, or whether it's just part of a stone of a building, then it certainly looks more like to be medieval than it is going to be for the post-med, because we're getting lots of brick elsewhere, and this certainly isn't brick.
Let's get a second large stone coming out here.
Good news, and there's more of it.
And it's hard to tell whether that's been shaped in any way.
We've had our first medieval find in Trench 1, where Keith's been metal detecting on the spoil heap. It's a tiny mount.
I think it probably is medieval, probably late medieval though, so sort of 1450, 1600 into the post-medieval period.
Yeah.
But as the light's coming down, can you see that
Yes.
that edge, that top edge is faceted, so it's catching the light, and originally it would have been a golden colour, so it's a thing which would have sparkled. And it's got a very, well, I'm not sure if that's the original length on the back of it, but if it's that short, it must be a piece of saddlery or something like that. So, yeah, maybe sort of a decorative mount of a saddle or...
Yes, I like the idea of that. So probably you've got several of these on a saddle.
Yeah.
So the horse is riding through the sunlight and you've got all these amazing mounts, no green, but they would have been very brassy coloured, golden, shining in the sunlight.
Yeah, catching light as it's galloping through the countryside.
Wow, I love that. It's fantastic. It's quite exciting, isn't it?
For something so small, it's great. Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, right, let's go.
Helping us with this dig are volunteers from local schools, historical societies and the Young Archaeologists Club.
OK, Stewart, we've got all the volunteers assembled. We've got 7 groups, each of which has got at least one adult with them, so we can do 7 test pits to start. What's the overall strategy?
Well, it's to look at what's going on outside the main enclosure. We know from the 1338 visitation document that there were the gardens here. We should expect things like orchards and there'll be animals around. And it's to find out what's happening outside, in the fields, in the trackways approaching.
So each of the test pits will be 1 metre square.
Yeah.
We can compare the volume of soil shifted in the test pits with the trenches and see if you've got more or less of it as you get away from the site, which might give you an idea of intensity of occupation. We can maybe have a look at the flotation of some of the soils and see what that's saying about what those bits of landscape might have been used for.
It looks to me as if it's going to be a great bit of fun as well, because they're learning how to do this at the same time, aren't they?
Test pit's great because essentially you're doing the whole archaeological process. So we've got this sort of step-by-step guide here that we've used for 2,500 of these.
I think I should really read that.
But actually what it does, it means everyone's following the same method, but essentially it's like a dig-in mini. So they're going right from the very beginning of laying out the site, drawing a sketch map to show where it is, going down layer by layer and then making good the site afterwards. So they do get that whole experience.
Isn't it great to see sort of archaeology being done, but actually a whole new generation being enthused by doing this?
Absolutely, and hopefully some of them it'll carry on as a lifelong interest.
Archaeology really is addictive, and nothing quite beats the thrill of finding something that adds to the story, as I discovered in Trench 2.
Peter, could you have a look at this for me? Pull this out.
Oh my goodness.
The spoil heap.
From the spoil here?
Yes.
Okay, well it's a piece of glazed, what looks like glazed drinks vessel, a drinking vessel. So it's relatively thin. I would have thought it's actually going to be sort of 1550, 1650 in date, so sort of into the early post-medieval. And actually, you see this rough surface on the bottom. This is where the pot's been glazed and it's been put in the kiln, and that's where the base of the kiln has basically melted it. So you've got that sort of bubbly
base. So we've got the bottom of a drinking cup. And probably about this high with maybe 2 or 3 handles. They're called tigs. And yeah, they're sort of, we know it's late Cistercian ware. I'd need to look at the fabric to know a little bit more, but... And what, a tig, that it would be what, sort of a communal drinking cup? It's a communal drinking cup, so you'd have a drink and you pass it on and they take the handle and drink it, and yeah.
The date takes us to the end of the medieval period, and once it's been cleaned up, it will be a great find to put into my new Time Team virtual museum. And it'll be joining the 1338 inventory, the Saxon font from the chapel, and the stone sarcophagus. In the dome, Stewart's sharing plans of known preceptories to give everyone a better idea of what we might find.
I've put on the screen here a number of examples of other Hospitallers sites. You can see the red is a defining bank. The blue is water around, like a moat. They're all rectilinear enclosures.
And all much the same size?
All much the same size. So what you'd be looking for is, if you're looking for a medieval preceptory like ours, you'd be looking for something in an enclosure like that, and we have one here. So that's one big reason why this, I think, it follows that pattern.
And Rory, do you think there's room here to put all those elements that we could see on the 1338 visitation?
Oh, certainly, and there's only a few particular buildings that we know about from the 1338 survey. We know that there'll be a lot more than just the house, the garden, the dovecot in that area, and the watermill somewhere around. So they could certainly fit within this area.
And have we got any historic maps that help?
Here we are, Holston. There's the chapel there. This is a 1765 map. And it shows a leat, a water channel coming off the river in front of, to the north of Preceptory, which is where the stream pretty much is now.
And what do you think that's for?
Well, that's the sort of thing that could form 2 functions. It could be a leat to take water to a watermill. It could be to help drain the fields and lands. It could also be part of a chain of water feeding into other ponds. And interestingly, there's a big fish pond. So it's a classic medieval rectilinear fish pond.
Holston's earthwork suggests that there was an enclosure ditch, just like the other preceptories. So Henry and Naomi are coring it to see what they can find out about it.
Ugh. Okay. I reckon the next one there's just going to be a gush of water. Oh! Looks like charcoal. That is charcoal. So how far down are we now?
We're over 1.5 meters now.
1.5 meters, and we've got a piece of charcoal.
It's deep and wet, which suggests it might have been part of a water management system. We're well into the afternoon of day 1, and yet to find any evidence of the buildings that stood here in 1338.
Hello. Oh, Chris here. Just found this lovely bit of decorated tile.
Wow, I like it.
But in Trench 2, Hilda's team has found something quite promising.
This would be about yay big originally, so we haven't got quite what the pattern is. Quite often they're heraldic, or obviously in this context they'd be religious as well, but they are fantastic bits. And if you've got one engrossing tile, you'd expect to have a lot, because this would be a whole floor of them.
So do you see where there's this flat bit here, but then it appears to have broken off further down?
Yep, I think that's part of the manufacturing process, where they'll have a whole, sort of almost like a tray of them, stamping them, and then snap them off.
And it speaks to the sort of the sophistication, not just of the making process, but you imagine also the markets that would have needed to come together for different kinds of glazes,
yes,
the sorts of different manufacturing processes.
Could you put any kind of period or date on it?
I mean, it's medieval, that's for sure, but giving it any more specific date than that, I think is impossible at the moment. So, but I think it would go with the preceptory rather than afterwards.
It's extraordinary to think that this tile might once have been walked over by knights offering hospitality to pilgrims and other travellers. It's definitely one for my virtual museum.
OK, John, good to go?
So with renewed enthusiasm, we're opening up 2 new trenches. Trench 3, investigating a curious deep ditch-like feature on the geophys to the south of the chapel.
This is almost certainly what's giving off John's magnetic signal in this area. So we've come down to the layer we definitely want to be at. We just don't know what it is, and we don't know how big it is.
And to the north of the chapel, Trench 4 goes in, across one of Stewart's lumps and bumps that ties in with a geophysical anomaly.
So that could be that right angle I wanted.
I think it could be, yeah.
Just a bit more off.
And in Trench 1, Matt and Josh have found a wall.
Follow that along, and all the morning's work has been worthwhile, hasn't it?
And Stewart's wondering whether it might have been part of an old dovecot.
This is quite a small bird, I'm thinking.
Would it be anything like a pigeon?
Could be pigeon-like, could be pigeon-like, yeah.
It could be quite interesting because there is a reference in a document here to a proposal to build a dovecot, but on the site of the old dovecot.
Ah.
The question is, does the archaeology look like a dovecot? Matt's not convinced.
You can see this trench is in 2 halves, really. You've got the kind of soily end over there, and here's our wall over here. Can you see the bricks coming across there? That's it.
So that's the inside of...
This is the inside, yeah, and then that's the old ground surface. Stu has got a theory that here was a dovecot. We had all the brick rubble of a building. It's positioned right in front of the house, lovely to look at. The trouble is, it's filling a big rubble void. You've got this lovely brick wall going straight down, and I'm standing on at least 70 centimetres, possibly more, of rubble. Wow. I don't know of any dovecots which have a kind of cellar which you could kind of backfill with rubble. So I don't think it's a dovecot.
So what do you think it might be?
I'm not sure. I mean, we're positioned in front of the house for a folly or a building made purely for visual entertainment. So why there's a kind of functional cellar or undercroft of some sort, I don't know. So my answer, I'm afraid, Gus, is at the moment, I've got no idea.
But do the finds give us a clue as to what might have been here?
Well, some of them do. So we've got this post-medieval pottery, part of another TIG, like the TIG you found earlier, but this one's much later, so this is going to be sort of more 1720, 1760. The bit which is much more exciting is this, which is a late medieval encaustic floor tile, which is going to date from around about 1450, 1400, 1450, which is intriguing because it's not inside the chapel, it's outside the chapel. But it's the sort of thing that when you refurbish a chapel, yes, you get rid of the rubbish floor which was there and you put a nice new floor down. So are we looking at a renovation of this and a church here before or a chapel here before? Or are we looking at a site of a new building, as in a medieval building here?
We're hoping the stonework in Trench 1 could be the footings of one of the buildings of Halston's Preceptory. Meanwhile, in Trench 3, they've found charcoal and something much earlier.
This piece of pottery is not medieval.
When's this?
It's Roman.
Not what we were after.
Oh, clay pipe.
Clay pipe, yeah.
We're on the money.
In Trench 4, Chris is already beginning to reveal some bricks and stones quite near the surface.
So it's very early days of cleaning at the moment, but it looks like we've got a wall line appearing between about there and there, where we've got this greyer stony and CBM and the kind of chalk and mortar packing. The geophys suggests that carries across the trench and then returns and goes back off that way, and again outside the trench this way and returns. So hopefully we've got some kind of U-shaped building.
Good news too in Trench 2, where Hilda's beginning to expose a floor surface.
Proper cobbles.
On the other side, can you spare?
And a couple of surprising finds.
Lovely.
if it is a glazed roof tile, they're exceptionally rare on rural sites in Shropshire, as in really rare.
I didn't know that. Does that mean we couldn't have one?
No, but we've got a high status medieval building, haven't we? So why can't we have a high status medieval roof tile?
Well, we could. It would be rather lovely if we did.
This is late in the history of the site, so this is going to be sort of 1450, 1400, 1500-ish.
I think that makes it very exciting.
That is really exciting.
It's a good piece for day one.
Yeah.
The green glazed roof tiles must have made quite a statement in the later medieval period, and Trench 2 has produced another rare find from an earlier date.
So going from buildings to small finds, so we've got a lovely domestic find here, a spindle wall, lead spindle wall, and you can just see here it's got little patterns all around it, these little circular globules, and this would have been used to spin wool with, to make a thread. So this is the weight that would weight the wool down. Predominantly used by women. Probably date is actually probably quite early. I was just having a chat with Helen. We reckon maybe 1100 to 1200.
Ooh, that's the earliest thing then we've got so far.
Excellent.
This little spindle whorl was probably dropped by one of the women weaving woolen textiles for the monks, or maybe to generate income for the Preceptory. It could date back as far as the foundation of the Preceptory in the late 12th century, when the Crusades were at their height and the area around Whittington Castle was embroiled in bitter battles between the Welsh and the English. We're still short of in situ archaeology, but Stewart's still confident that we'll locate the elusive buildings listed in the 1338 inventory.
The thing that's really, really nice in a way is what's coming up in that trench there, where there's a courtyard surface coming up, and we should be expecting courtyards in a Preceptory area. That might be our first tangible below ground thing that we're starting to understand.
But you said there'd be a hall amongst lots of other buildings. We've put the trenches in over the radar where we've got suggestions of structures, and they've all turned out to be later in date, 17th, 18th century, garden sort of features, for want of a better term. And when I asked you earlier in the day, could the chapel be part of the hall rather than a separate building, you seemed to be adamant that the chapel was separate, that we had
not
a hall.
Adamant. It's that we've only got one site where we've had Hospitallers excavation to understand one. That's at South Witham, and that's an external one.
And there's no reason why monasteries all have to be the same. We always think of them as being on the same plan, but it's only particular houses like the Cistercians, Carthusians that are like that. Other ones are really individual. This could be like anything.
So it could be that structure there is not actually the original chapel, but that could be the hall.
It's distinctly possible. The strategy here is we're evaluating what we've got on day one using the techniques we've got, and the plan is to then look closer to this area. We're actually narrowing down what we're looking at.
What I want to do is take the radar initially inside the chapel that we talked about, see if we can find this early vault. But I'd really like to do the graveyard itself to see if we can find any walls or any features extending beyond that black and white building.
But the thing is, this is day one. You know, we're bound to be in a situation where we're not sure. You know, even I'd like you to be sure, John, but I think that at the end of day one, we've got to be realistic.
So will Stewart prove that the visible lumps and bumps are the remains of Halston's medieval preceptory, or are we actually looking at an 18th century garden landscape? 2 days left to find out. Join a thriving worldwide community of Time Team fans on Patreon. Your ongoing membership enables us to develop more sites and more episodes. It's day 2 here at Holston Hall in Shropshire. The fog has descended on Stewart's quest to prove that this landscape was once a medieval preceptory belonging to the Knights Hospitallers.
I mean, this is a genuine medieval stone tomb. This has got to belong to the Hospitallers.
No.
Yeah.
Although some finds suggest we could be in the right place.
If it is a glazed roof tile, they're exceptionally rare on rural sites in Shropshire.
The archaeology looks more like 18th century garden buildings, but by the end of day 1, there were signs of something possibly earlier.
Proper cobbles.
Part of the difficulty of this site is that we have little to compare it to. Only one medieval preceptory has been fully excavated, but Stewart is still convinced that we just need to keep the faith.
Things like that beautiful oak tree there, you see the tree? That's at least 500 years old, that oak. And it's sitting in the ditch of the moat. So that gives us a datum to date that ditch from. So that ditch is at least 500 years old. And you can see on the LiDAR here, there's the enclosure that we determined to be the precinct boundary of the preceptory. That's where the oak tree is there, incidentally. There's a chapel. Can you see there, Gus?
Yes.
These light patches are raised earthworks. So that's telling me that there is a rectangular feature over there. So I'm putting a trench across it to see what it is.
By the end of today, we'll have something concrete.
Well, I hope it's not concrete.
So trench 5 will go in front of the entrance of the chapel.
Now all we need is a digger.
But we'll have to wait for the digger because Matt's expanding trench 1.
There's always a nervous moment when you walk to trenches first thing in the morning, isn't it?
Where he's still hopeful he's on the right lines.
You remember yesterday we had the structure at this end. We've got the brick wall with a possible stone wall next to it. Well, we've found the base of the, it's not quite a cellar, it's like an undercroft. It's about 1 metre deep and it is chock full of this post-medieval rubble. So we know how deep that is. And you can see we've started taking out all the rubble. So that's one end of the trench.
Yes.
This is really a trench of 2 halves. This side is completely different. We're onto this kind of silty brown stuff here. And from that, we're getting medieval finds. Just this morning, we had this lovely bit of green glazed medieval pottery.
How wonderful, man.
And that's from the same deposit that that lovely floor tile came from yesterday. And I don't know if you've seen over in Hilda's trench this morning, she's got a very similar deposit. She's gone right down through it, and at the bottom is a beautiful, possibly medieval cobbled surface. So on this end, I think we're going to carry on down. We're going to machine down very carefully, see if we can get to the same layer.
So Matt continues in trench 1, hoping to discover a medieval surface. And the Geophys team are using radar inside the graveyard. They're looking for any signs to support the theory that the chapel might have moved over the centuries, and the current building could once have been a medieval hall. In trench 2, the cobbled surface is coming through, but we need finds to tell if it's medieval. Chris is feeling confident in trench 4, where there are some bricks beginning to emerge.
We've got a brick wall that's just started to come out here, and that's going to come up this way and return and go that way out of the trench and then turn back again to give us a 3-sided structure, which is possibly some kind of gazebo for looking out over the house from in front of the chapel. We've got a compacted floor surface here, which we think was covered in quarry tiles. We've managed to find one of those this morning. And then outside the structure, we've got a beaten earth floor with a possible post hole in it at the end of the trench there. So today we're going to record this at the level we've got, and then we're going to get the machine back in, and we're going to take the level down and hopefully find some of the preceptory underneath it.
Bear's hoping for information to add to his reconstruction of the preceptory. He's also planning to add characters into the scenes by scanning our re-enactors. The story of the Knights of St. John might have begun in 11th century Jerusalem, but their legacy is still very much in evidence today.
The traditions of the Hospitallers are more than 1,000 years old, but there are contemporary manifestations of those traditions, and perhaps the one that you know best is the St. John's ambulance. And I'm here to meet James. You're a cadet, aren't you?
Yes, that's right.
So can you tell me a little bit of how you got started, your training?
With your training, you'd attend your local unit and you would do basic training such as CPR, recovery position, choking, bandaging and stuff, so that you were able to go out on an actual event and be able to actually treat people that get injured and save a life in your local community.
The training James would have undergone in the 14th century was a little bit different.
So, James, now you've joined the Order, it's time to get you garbed in the clothing of the Order. Now, normally we'd take all the things that you brought into the Order, all your worldly goods, and sell them for the benefit of the poor, but fortunately, you're already wearing the garb of the Order, so we can start off with this as an underlayer of clothing, and if the brothers bring in the kappa.
The kappa bearing the White Cross was part of a strictly allocated uniform designed to illustrate the piety of the Order. It would have been worn over chain mail during battle.
You gird this round your waist as a reminder to you of the vows that you have sworn the Order. There we go. Look up. How's that feel? Welcome to the Order, Brother James.
Part of the preceptor's job was to provide hospitality to travellers, and the finds from Matt's Trench fit perfectly with this.
It's really thin to start off with, so, and it's glazed on the outside. It's most likely to be from a late medieval jug, so a piece of pot which had been made after the Black Death, probably about 1350, 1400.
So that's the right date for the
more.
Preceptory then, isn't it?
It is, it's towards the end.
And secondly, this, now Keith handed me this earlier, he found it with his metal detector.
Okay.
Again, it's a coin, but that's about as far as my knowledge goes.
Okay, what we should see on this side is a king's head with his sort of name around the outside of it. We can't see that at the moment, but on this side we've got a long cross which tells us that it's late medieval, so it's going to be from probably the sort of 1280s, 1300, maybe as late as 1377, but we'll need to clean this up to be able to tell you exactly where it is, but almost all of these date from Edward I to Edward II's reign.
The coin could give us a date to within about 20 years, so we might be able to link it to one of the preceptors whose names are on the records. One of these men was probably laid to rest in the sarcophagus, but where was the coffin buried? We know that there was already a church and a manor at Holston when it was granted to the Hospitallers in 1170.
That's very narrow.
Yeah.
And there's a crypt, which might hold evidence of an earlier chapel. So John and Simon are scanning the area with the radar.
So yeah, that's roughly the end of it.
The owners of Halston Hall tell us that the crypt was broken into some time ago, and they're keen for us to assess the damage. So Kerry's taking up part of the flagstones that were cracked by the intruders to allow us to look inside. Our research has revealed that in 1499, a chaplain named John Griffith ap Rees was granted lodging at the Preceptory. In return, he had to conduct services either in a chapel at Holston or in a chapel at Whittington Castle. But by that time, the castle was in ruins, after centuries of scuffles and battles with the Welsh and the English. So we're wondering where that chapel might have been.
We've got a huge tower plot behind, so do you think that could be a contender for where the chapel might have been based?
It's possible at one time, but again, the whole thing could move around. I mean, this is the Great Keep. I mean, this was a 4 or 5 story building there, and it's a common place to put the chapel. If you think about the Tower of London, the chapel's in there.
That's really interesting, because I'd always assumed the chapel would be a freestanding structure or a discrete building, but it could have been in one of the other structures.
It's very common to be in one of the other buildings on the site, yeah. But then that was flattened in the 13th century.
We talked earlier about the stonework in the foundations of our chapel perhaps coming from here. Now you've seen the place, do you think it's likely that the stonework could have come from here?
Well, if you just see the size of this site and how little is left still standing, it makes logical sense to have reused some of this stone. It's only 1.5 miles away to Halston.
Although we'd drawn a blank on the location of the chapel, it seems that the stories of the castle and the preceptory are interwoven throughout the medieval period. Back on site, Trench 5 is now underway, and in Trench 2 we found 2 features that showed up on John's geophys, one of which is a land drain cut into the cobbled surface, but the other could be something more relevant to our story.
I think that's another land drain, parallel to that one.
Yes.
But the features coming through here coincide with where Stewart thought there would be a wall and a ditch. So the complication is that a wall and a narrow ditch? Are they later or are they earlier in time?
I think there might be the remains of a wall, potentially a robbed out wall with rubble in it, and I think there's then a big ditch with different fills in it. So I think it's all going to be one big feature at the moment, but we won't know until we dig it.
So perhaps this could be the remains of a medieval building under the cobbles. Meanwhile, confusion still reigns in Trench 1. Mad and Josh have located what they thought was the other wall of the brick building they found earlier. But it's stone.
We had the wall there, which is made of brick, but this far wall here is made of stone. Now, we have this enclosure showing on the radar going all the way around here, which lines up with the brick there. So we can assume that this enclosure is brick, which is what we thought it was.
So, does the stone wall have anything to do with the post-medieval brick enclosure? Or could it be from an earlier building? Outside the enclosure ditch, the volunteers have been hard at work in a series of test pits designed to identify signs of farming, pasture or the gardens, which would help us understand how the preceptory functioned. But there are very few finds coming up.
I've dug thousands of these test pits, and normally you'd expect maybe 1 or 2 sherds of medieval pottery if you've got arable fields that have been manured by the manure heap collecting up, and then you take out in the fields, and bits of broken pottery have also got incorporated into it. So you normally might expect 1 or 2 in a metre square test pit. I think we've had about 3 sherds of medieval pottery from all 9 of the test pits, so if anything, we're below average.
We do know from other preceptories and inventories that there are orchards and gardens associated with preceptories. Would that fit that?
Potentially,
lack of
yes,
material?
actually, because you're probably not manuring your orchards or your garden. You might think you might be using the gardens more intensively, though, so it might work better with orchards, but it would also work with something like pasture or meadow. I think that test pit produced 2 sherds, so out of the 3 we got, I think 2 of them came from that. So possibly this area is being used slightly differently to these areas.
But everything buildings-wise, you might expect to find going to be within that enclosure, aren't they?
Well, and that's what's really interesting. So what we've done now, most of these test pits are going down to natural. What we've done is we're starting to move in. So we've done the perimeter, we're starting to close in a little bit, if you like, on the enclosure. So we've got one test pit in the bottom of the ditch there, we've got another one starting here. As soon as we started this one here, we had much more roofing slate coming up, but we had as much from the first 10 centimetres of that test pit as we'd had from all of these put together.
This is stuff that's being dumped in the ditch, presumably?
I think so, yes. So it gives that sense that there's increasing concentration.
Right.
If we had to do size of circles based on numbers of bits of slate, I think you'd see it getting denser and denser as you get to the centre.
The reason we know that there were gardens and orchards at the preceptory, as well as a mill and a dovecot, is because there were detailed records and inventories that the Knights Hospitallers maintained.
The church viewed literacy as quite important to its members on account of the fact that they were a continuing organisation. Landowners might come and go, kings would live and die, the church would continue and its landholdings would continue. So they placed a great store on keeping documentary records of everything they did and everything they owned.
So I suppose that's what gives us all those documents that we've spent the last couple of days looking at.
Yeah, exactly. They'll have their own groups of clerks, and actually the 1338 report, almost all of the different preceptory accounts say that they have a steward or a scribe in the preceptory staff, so they always have at least one person there because it's such an essential job.
Despite the records of preceptory buildings, we're still not sure we found any evidence of them in our trenches.
So this was actually in situ within the wall, was it?
It was right in between the brick courses there, so excellent for dating evidence.
Brilliant.
But Keith's found something that he's hoping might give us a date for the building in Trench 4.
Oh gosh, that's thin, isn't it? Wow, look at that. So that, well, the greeny tinge that you get there suggests to me that it's copper alloy, and it's so thin that that's been hammered. The size and the shape suggests to me that it's at least medieval, if not maybe post-medieval. You can just see a little bit of the lettering around the circumference there. It's quite difficult to see, but it is there. So if I get this under a microscope, there's a possibility that I might be able to actually do a bit more further identification.
That'd be good, yeah, that'd be cool.
Interesting that it was found between the bricks, did you say?
Yes, yeah, actually in the wall itself.
Interesting. I mean, that could just be complete coincidence, couldn't it?
Yes.
But sometimes you do get coins put in between.
Yeah, or it could be part of the mix that's kind of churned up when they're making the mortar and stuff. But certainly we think we're in a post-medieval structure here for sure.
Yes, okay, yeah. Okay, well, this is really interesting. It's interesting how it's turning round as well, though.
Yeah, that's a bit of a surprise, yeah.
Yeah.
It seems that nothing on this site is quite what we expected. John's processed the radar of the east end of the chapel and has some exciting news.
That's typically a grave. We've got something far, far larger, and I reckon that's an air void. That's the critical thing.
That's very different to that grave signature, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's not full of rubble. I think you've got a curved roof at the top, but this extends 3 metres beyond the east wall.
Outside of the church?
Outside of the church. If I didn't know better, I'd have said the signals we got from the inside over the crypt were very, very similar.
Oh, I see.
And this suggests that the crypt goes 3 metres beyond. Nothing else could explain that.
Right.
And if you look at the model we're just doing, and what we've tried to do is model it here, and there you can see the actual roof. The walls are going to be intact as well.
Yeah. How far is that roof below the ground surface?
Very close, within 25, 30 centimetres or so.
Okay. You happy for us to lift it then, Richard? Yep. It's loose, I reckon we can do it.
If the crypt extends beyond the wooden chapel, it suggests that it could be part of an earlier stone phase.
What can you see, Derek?
Oh, it goes on for a while. There's some structures down there. There's a... Oh, yeah, sorry. It's hard to say, look.
But it has got stone wall on that side.
It does, yeah.
But they've got these brick infill walls, which have been repaired.
Which was what you suspected, wasn't it?
Yeah, so...
But the stone perhaps wasn't what you were expecting?
I wasn't expecting that to be stone lined on that side, no.
I wonder if there's any carvings or inscriptions on the stone.
Oh, that would be interesting.
There'll be some coffin plates.
Oh,
should be.
I'd love to get them 3D scanned so we can keep a permanent record of them. That'd be amazing.
I think we need to get some decent lighting down there.
That is true,
to actually understand what's going on.
With more light, we'll be able to assess the state of the coffins in the crypt, as well as search for signs of an earlier chapel. Using 3D scans combined with Adam's aerial photogrammetry, we're able to examine all the evidence from every possible angle.
We've taken Adam's 3D model of the chapel, which we had up on the big screen, and have kind of converted it into a hologram.
And Stewart Eve is exploring the archaeological potential of Tilt 5 technology.
Yeah, and then you can look at it up there and make the same screen and look at the front and the back at the same time.
Awesome.
It's pretty sci-fi, isn't it?
We're going to be doing concerts like this in years to come.
And he's demonstrating to Helen how she could identify finds by exploring virtual museum collections.
I can bring that really high up.
Exactly, and you can spin it
What
around a little
happens
bit.
if I
try and...
I think your finger will go straight through it.
But... Oh, it's really odd, yes. It's like having the whole museum collections of the whole world on your table.
Exactly.
This is just going to change everything.
We've got to play with it to see what we can do with it, haven't we? Yeah, exactly.
And this is one of the reasons why we think it's so important to begin to create our own Time Team virtual museum. At the east end of the chapel, Stewart was hoping to find signs of the hall, and there's something in Trench 5.
You know what it is yet?
Jury's out at this stage. Give me 20 minutes, we'll know.
By the middle of the 14th century, the Knights at Holston controlled many of the hospitaller sites in Wales. They would have offered hospitality and medical care to pilgrims en route to St David's or Canterbury, and to brother knights on their way to fight in the Crusades. And our cadet James is being introduced to some of the medical instruments that the Knights of St John would have had at their disposal.
So if I might borrow your arm for a second, if we needed to amputate part of your body, this would be drawn round in one smooth cut to take the flesh away, and then we would use a bone saw to go through your bone, as the name implies. Or if we were looking at a finger or a toe that needed amputating, we have a digit chisel. So put it on at the joint, hit it with a hammer, and bang, take that away quite nicely and quickly. And this is one of my favourite bits moving on from this. What do you think this might be used for?
Would it be used to remove organs and things?
No, but you're getting into the sort of right area with it. This is a trepanning drill for drilling into people's skulls. And trepanning is, the oldest form of surgery. We've got thousands of years' history of that, and it is still used today. But the methodology that we have from various sources and depictions is to clamp the patient's head between your legs, apply this to their head, and spin it between your palms.
While some of the more gory instruments are unlikely to have been used at Halston, some of the herbal remedies, such as cloves for toothache, are still in use.
And do you know what we use aspirin for today?
Blood thinning medication.
Blood thinning and pain, yeah. But this isn't actually aspirin, this is the pre-refined form. This is willow bark. Now, I'm not entirely sure who decided that gnawing on a willow tree would make them feel less pain, but someone clearly did, and ironically, they had a point.
I know it's fascinating seeing these treatments for physical ailments, but what about the psychological? What about people who may have been suffering some mental stress?
One of the preceptors here in the early 1500s, George Aylmer, is actually removed from office because he's considered to have gone mad. And this happens in about 1535. We know that he was at the Siege of Rhodes in 1522, which was a particularly brutal siege, went on for most of a year, and ended with the Hospitallers losing the island that had really become a very important and core part of their identity.
So a 21st century reading might be that that was post-traumatic stress and that he had some sort of a breakdown.
It's always difficult to sort of diagnose back into the past, but certainly an event like that, it's going to have an impact on you. And so it could be one of the factors that led to what happened to him.
The soldiers of the 21st century might hope for more sympathetic treatments. In Trench 4, it's safe to say the deeper we go, the more confusing the archaeology is becoming.
40 centimetres then.
With a strange-shaped brick wall and mysterious stone floors.
You think it's a genuine void underneath it? It's not rabbit
at the moment.
Well, not rabbit.
I mean, if it is rabbits, they haven't disturbed this layer here.
Yeah.
So they've done very well, targeting the construction cut and following it under.
Medieval rabbit.
Yeah.
We're now hoping that we will get a date for the brick wall, because Danny's cleaned up the coin that Keith found, which Peter now thinks is a jeton.
What's the difference between the coin and the jeton?
So a coin can be spent absolutely anywhere. A jeton is a token, and we think these are used for counting on boards or just playing cards and things like that, as just fake money.
What's fantastic about this is we can see here, we've got the letters under the microscope, we can actually make out the lettering, can't we?
Yeah.
So who is this that we've got here?
So we've got a chap called Wolf Laver, who the coin actually says in Nuremberg. So he's a coin master in Nuremberg making these things, and they're being brought into Britain in their hundreds of thousands. So the books say that Wolf Laver II is striking coins between 1612 and 1651, which is really, really exciting because this is coming out of a feature, and this is proper dating of that feature.
So it looks like the building in Trench 4 dates to a period of remodelling after the Preceptory had passed into the hands of the Mitten family. The coin in Trench 1 is much earlier though.
And what's lovely is that we can see, if we look at it on the screen here, we can just see the O and the R of Cantor for Canterbury. So that's great to be able, we actually know where it was minted. The O and the R tells us where it was minted.
Yeah, and this here is the pointy back of the
this here
of the C.
Of the C.
C for Civitas.
And we know it's Edward II
Yes,
because of that.
because of that.
That's what's the amazing thing with numismatics, isn't it?
Yeah.
Actually. So not only do we know it's Edward II, we think it is 11B, type 11B, which dates from 1307 to 1312.
Right at the beginning of his reign.
That's amazing, isn't it? So we are right back there.
Yeah.
Right in the early 1300s.
Which is exactly where we want to be for the Preceptory, which is, we're back on track.
Bear's scanning our finds and placing them into our virtual museum. And now he's working with another piece of the TIG I found yesterday.
So it's probably that way up.
So what would it have actually looked like? What would a TIG have actually looked like as a thing that one might hold, possess, use?
Well, there are quite a lot of virtually complete or complete ones. We've got one, oh yes, look at that, isn't that wonderful? So you can see its shininess, and they've often got these horizontal bands of almost decoration, almost constructional detail. And the multiple handles presumably means that, even though they're quite small, they're passed from one person to another. So you know how hard it is to hand somebody a cup of tea?
Yeah.
These are really easy. I don't know why they ever went out of fashion. They're such practical little things.
But there's obviously some kind of vulnerability around the handles, because this example, that it has obviously broken almost along identical...
Yes, Matt spotted that. Maybe you're passing it from one person to the other and it doesn't quite go as smoothly as you think.
So we're dropping in 1550.
So we have a date, so we can actually put our TIG into our timeline. So Helen, what else is happening in that period?
Edward VI is just coming to the end of his reign, but of course nobody knows he's going to die. But they do know that when he does, Mary is going to take over, and of course she tries to revive the order, as we can see down here on the timeline. But the estate has already been granted to Richard Mitten, so it's not going to work here because it's somebody else is already in control of it. In effect, it's been secularised already. So perhaps you might think that this would be one of the last things that the Knights Hospitaller use in the late 1530s, 1540. You know, they could quaff their last and chuck the TIG down as they leave. Or maybe Richard Mitten is toasting his arrival with this. But they carry on being made for another 100 years or so, so they're virtually into the kind of chocolate, coffee, the new hot drinks coming in. But this one would probably, I can't imagine anything other than something alcoholic, something special in this one.
Oh, very nice.
Ooh, ooh. Okay.
In Trench 1, they've drilled down next to the post-medieval brick wall, and they found a lot of bones.
Oh, okay, wow. So what we seem to have, we've got a spinal column. As I've just lifted this here, I was thinking what's wrong with it, because it's very straight here. This is chopped. The whole spine has been chopped like that. So that's what we've got here. It is animal, so it's not panic. I was a little bit worried when I saw that down here.
Up at the other end of the trench, Matt has been hoping that the stone wall is part of a medieval building.
We've got a brick wall at that end, we've got a stone wall at this end, and the question is,
which one's older. Is that a medieval? Because when I see stone, I thought, straight away, is it medieval?
Is there any more to coming out of that?
Little tiny bit down in between there, if you want to. Kind of, where is it? It's kind of quite dark and clayey.
I don't mind a clayey mortar, that would be med, but it's almost like a mud, isn't it? I mean, that would go with a medieval kind of mortar. You know, there's no lime in there, is there?
Yeah, and the question is really, was this a freestanding stone wall that they've banked up later as a part of the landscaping?
Yeah.
Or is it just a part of the whole landscaping and it's been cut into the ground? This is all a part of the same building.
Mm-hmm. So if you follow that wall down to try and find a floor level and you find it's the same as that floor level you've got there, then you can say it's part of the same building, presumably.
The further we go down by the brick wall, the more bones emerging. We're nearly as deep as the crypt.
Oh my God. So there are, I don't want to blaspheme in the church, but that is astonishing. So can we get the cameras down there, do you think, and actually get a closer look?
I think we need more light.
By the end of the day, we're tidying up the test pits to move inside the enclosure, and we've got a bit of a puzzle in Trench 4.
The brick and the stone, are they part of the same structure?
I don't think the bricks are part of this structure. I think it's something separate. And you can see it continues in the radar in that direction. So I'd like to see the trench expanded. Then we might understand what's going on.
The line of that side of it is in line with the kink in the brickwork.
What are you suggesting the brick is then? A dovecot?
Well, if we go that way and find another angle in the building, then polygonal structures in a parkscape or whatever tend to be things like dovecots.
But if you expand that, it would take it back here.
It is huge, isn't it?
You get big dovecots.
Yeah, I mean, the size is all right, but the thing that bothers me a bit is if that size is that big, then this edge is only halfway in this direction, as it were. It actually doesn't make any sense to me that
you want sense.
Yeah, but the only way we can actually answer it is to excavate it and critically examine the relationship between that brick wall and this plinth. I mean, this looks solidly medieval to me.
And also, is this significant? This was found, the quarry tile, found on top of the stone. Now, was that a surface for the stone, or did it come much, much later as a debris?
But one tile does not...
a pile of smoke?
No.
I don't know. If we see more of those, it'd be very useful.
We're hoping that the flagstones turn out to be part of one of our medieval preceptory buildings. Meanwhile, our cadet, James, has finished the final element of his training to prepare him for the Crusades.
We'll make a soldier out of you yet, boy.
But before being sworn in, the cadets would have maintained an overnight vigil in the chapel.
Et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
So, since we've no wish to disturb his prayers, we've moved to the pub to mull over the day's activities.
It's a great day.
We've had a really productive day, made a lot of progress, but we've only got one day left, so we've really got to crack on tomorrow.
Yeah, what I want to do is really nail that building where in Trench 1. We've got the brick wall at one side, that's fine, but on the other side there's the stone wall. Is it medieval? Is it not? We're going to clean it up. I really want to date that wall.
I think the key trench is number 4, because that's the only area where we've got medieval, probably stone structure. And they're nothing to do with this line of bricks that Richard's interested in.
But if you extend that trench, you'll find, hopefully, another angle. So you've got 2 angles there. You've got a polygonal structure, probably a dovecot.
What I want to do is find a date for this cobbled surface in my trench, because we still haven't got any dating evidence, so that's my one question I want to answer tomorrow. Do a sondage and find some dating.
Well, and the test pits have suggested there's very little intensive use of the landscape around the site, so what we want to do now is focus in on inside the enclosure, see if that's more intensively used, give a wider context.
What about the crypt? Isn't that the big thing? Isn't that what we need to...
The crypt is the most exciting thing we've got at the moment because there's a coffin in there which some people think could be the coffin of Mad Jack Mitten. And he is the most colourful character we've got. He had a pet bear and apparently he used to ride a horse upstairs to bed. And that is the kind of lifestyle that I really like.
Don't we want to, Richard, get in on top of those coffins and get a sense of which coffins belong to whom?
Yeah, we can get some better light in there and get a camera in. There's enough room above the coffins between that and the top of the crypt to actually get some good details of those coffin plates, yes.
Yes, because there does seem to be a coffin plate that we can see, and if we can get the lighting right, if we can get the camera at the right angle, there should be writing there that we would be able to read.
Lights, camera, action, just that, isn't it?
So together we brought Time Team back, and now we're going to take Time Team to the next level. Help us achieve 10,000 ongoing members on Patreon.
It's the beginning of day 3 at Holston Hall, where we're searching for evidence of the Preceptory of the Knights Hospitallers that Stewart believes stood here between the 11th and the 16th centuries. There are plenty of finds that date to the right period, and some signs that there was a medieval chapel here.
It's the sort of thing that when you refurbish a chapel, you get rid of the rubbish floor which was there and you put a nice new floor down.
But we want to know if the chapel stood where it is today.
Sorry, there's some decoration on something.
So we're delving inside the crypt on the hunt for answers.
But it has got a stone wall on that side.
So far we have found archaeology relating to the 18th century landscape gardens. But in Trench 4, we're hoping that the flagstones might lead us to something earlier than the brickwork.
So we're on top of the brick now, John, so just gentle scrapes.
OK, here we go.
Good luck.
So it's basically a torch on a stick, isn't it?
Going in?
Going in.
Good luck.
Where?
John's radar has revealed a crypt that stretches 3 metres beyond the back of the chapel. So we've hooked up a monitor for Helen and Richard to see if the crypt predates the chapel and to assess the damage done to the coffins inside.
I can see that there is writing that is quite large writing.
Okay.
And obviously it's upside down.
And it's on a slight kind of angle for trying to read it.
It looks huge.
Yeah. Oh, right. Sorry, if you go, can you go up, stop, and pan to your left?
Pan to my left.
Yeah. We've got lead coffins there.
Oh, it's a little lead coffin, isn't it?
And it's lost its outer shell. Because these coffins, as you know, they're triple coffins. You have an elm middle bit where you actually lay the body. That's wrapped in lead, for the second coffin. And then there's the oak coffin with the velvet on the outside.
So has the oak and velvet, has that just decayed?
I don't think it's probably been nicked.
Nicked?
Because considering how good the condition of the one beneath it is, the oak coffin
of course.
there, you can just see the lead.
Yes.
If you go back, there. No, go back to where you were. Stop.
Oh,
That's
there,
That's
there.
it. You can just see the lead coffin inside the oak coffin there.
Yes. Yes, and can we see that on this one at all? No, this is so well preserved.
We're also trying to see the nameplates on the coffins to find out whether Mad Jack Mitten, the eccentric 19th century landowner, is buried here, with, as legend would have it, his pet bear.
I'm sure we will be able to read that. Yes, totally.
And outside in Trench 2, Hilda is trying to get a date for the cobbled surface.
I always love coming back to this trench, Hilda, with its beautiful cobbled surface.
It is nice, isn't it?
Are you getting a sense of this space and what might have
Yes, it is all
here?
starting to come together now. So we've got a few different things going on here with a later possible wall, very crude wall foundation or a robbed out wall trench, and then a ditch next to it as well with the rubble from that wall probably packed down into it. The one question I really wanted to answer was what's the possible date of this cobbled surface? So we did a sondage through it, and we actually got a find from well within the cobbles.
Wow. And it's a really good find as well. This is a bit of German stoneware pottery. We're looking at sort of an object which is helping say a little bit about the wealth of the people who are here in the sort of 1550s, 1600s.
And what would it have been used for?
They'd classically hold schnapps and alcoholic drinks. So in Shropshire, this is really rare on a rural site. If we were in an urban setting, they're quite common, but out in the countryside, it shows a site which has the power to bring sort of imported objects to it.
Even though our piece of ceramic is 16th century, it does seem to suggest that there was probably some sort of continuous presence here long before that.
Exactly, so this cobbled surface could have already been here by the time that piece of pot ended up in there.
The preceptor at this time was Richard Shelley, another Knight of Rhodes. He was appointed in 1558 and was also the last Grand Prior of England during the turbulent period before Elizabeth I disbanded the order. It ties in with the final chapter of the story of the Preceptory, but we're still short of earlier structures, so with less than a day to go, Carenza's moved her test pits inside the enclosure to see what they can find.
So we've got 2 test pits in the ditch that we started yesterday in the bottom of the ditch around the enclosure here. So there's 10 there, and there's number 11 is there.
And are they beginning to yield more substantial?
Yep, so immediately when we started off 10 yesterday, we started to get more brick turning, well, more slate turning, a lot of slate. We're now started number 12, number 13, number 14 and number 15 here. And you can see looking at that, the soil is a kind of dark, rich brown colour.
Yes.
Now the soil in the outer test pits was much lighter coloured, suggesting there's no organic use, it hasn't been used for cultivation. And I mean, this is literally this first. So as I say, the other test pits in the whole ½ a metre depth, they were producing maybe 1 or 2 bits like that. But even in this first 10 centimetre layer, we've got a dozen pieces of brick and tile, some quite bigger bits. We've got some roof slate there, and we've even got a bit of animal bone. But instantly we're getting a completely different set of finds from the test pits here. So and that will help us confirm this idea that we've got a kind of empty area, an empty zone around the outside.
And then a concentration of activity in the centre around the chapel.
Yeah, and we can directly compare because all the test pits are the same size and shape.
Wow.
So, signs of more buildings, although nothing medieval yet. Although the Knights' main duties were to care for pilgrims and to raise money for the order, they also provided a surprising service to people who forfeited the right to a Christian burial.
In medieval Europe, if you are executed as a criminal or if you die by suicide, you don't get buried in consecrated ground. And yet that's really important as a Christian to have that burial. The Hospitallers claimed a right to bury anyone, including them. And we have lots of stories of the Hospitallers doing so, and sometimes doing so a bit too early. So there are multiple instances of their servants going along to a gallows, cutting someone down who seems dead, and the person then revives, runs into the nearest church, is given sanctuary, and then manages to escape for England and go abroad. And this happens again and again.
But how did all of this go down? You know, you can imagine that the local authorities not being too pleased.
Well, that's how we know that it happened, because we have the court records of them being brought into court, and yet every time that they end up in court for this, the Hospitallers are let off. It's recognised that they still have the right to do this. And initially it starts off where they say that this is just people who join our confraternity, which is sort of like a monastic loyalty club, an associate member. And then it expands to anyone who donates to them. And then eventually it expands to just anyone.
Wow.
And at this point, they're not gaining anything by taking, say, these people who've been executed on the gallows. There's nothing really for them to benefit from that, and yet they're still doing it. So this is really the charitable side of any religious order shining through.
So it seems that all kinds of dubious characters could have been buried by the knights at Holston, but we're still not sure where they conducted their services and whether the chapel is in its original position. Richard's been poring over all the scans and the models, hoping for something to help date this building. And finally he's had a breakthrough upstairs in the gallery.
Richard, what have you discovered? Anything interesting?
Yes, because this area is less altered than anywhere else in the chapel.
Right.
So we've got at least 3 different phases of work up here.
3 different phases?
Yep.
How can you tell that?
Well, we've got the original phase. You can see the close studding because it hasn't got that panelling on it.
Right.
So you can see the original close studding. You can see also how it's been hacked to be blasted all over at one time. It's got this lovely raddle red colour.
Raddle red.
It's a kind of medieval pigment paint you get in early buildings like this.
Wow,
but it does carry on. You still get that colouring going on into the 18th century.
But indicative of...
It can be indicative, yeah. So you've got that. That's all fine. And you've got the cusped wind braces there holding up the moulded purlins.
Right.
That's all part of the original build.
OK.
And then you look over there and you've got a very odd truss. And you think, what's going on there? Until you actually realise that this beam has got nothing to do with the original beam underneath it. This has been inserted.
Ah, is that why there's some slots there that don't seem to be doing anything?
You've got redundant peg holes and stuff, so it's a reused beam, and it's associated with those timbers above. You've got the sort of slightly raking posts either side, and then braces in the middle. And you've got this here, tenon for a beam coming that way, and the same on that side. So that, I think, is part of an inserted belfry.
A belfry?
Yeah, so inserted into the chapel.
At a later date?
At a later date,
OK.
Yeah. So that's your second phase, and then that's gone because they built the tower. So you got your 3 phases.
Fantastic. How fascinating. What I love most about this is that we've had Matt and his team down there doing some survey for us using all the technology. Actually, it's just a short trip up a ladder that's helped to answer the most information.
I know it is, but it's done my knees in.
The idea that the chapel once had a belfry marries with an illustrated map from the late 16th century.
Isn't that lovely?
I love that.
Isn't that lovely?
Looks like an illustration from a children's book.
This is a late 16th century map. It's probably drawn for a dispute in and around this area of Whittington in relation to Babinge Forest, which was a major resource and people were doing things that they shouldn't do. So it's like a really important map at the time. This boundary here is a boundary of the extra parochial land I was showing you on the other map, and you can see here the river running through it, so you've got the Holston on this side of it. But the detail is really interesting because if you look at how cottages are drawn around Whittington, they're just quite simple, almost like little blocks, one door in it. But if you look here at Holston, that is clearly a church or a chapel with a belfry and a cross on the top of it. Very, very, very typical depiction of that. And here we have a barn. You see the big arch that you get with barns, little dots for the ventilation windows in. But isn't it interesting? It's showing a chapel and a barn, a late 16th century, a big cluster of things in exactly the place that we are.
I've got a reference to a barn in a document which is also on here. Now this is 1427. And it's a list of income received, really.
1427. Wow.
If we look on here,
you can read this, can you?
Yeah.
I can't.
I have had help. So it starts here with 4 in Roman numerals. 4 pence received from the barn. This is the word for barn, orei, at Holston this year. And the word orei is, in classical Latin, it's horeum. Here it's aureum. And it's related to the Latin for barley, which is hordeum, in the same way as English barn is related to English barley. So it's the same root.
And this is being probably used to collect the ties from outside, from the area that they rent out to farming tenants, and collecting the ties, all coming into Holston to a barn. It needs to have that facility.
It's got to, because it's taking income in kind as well as in cash.
Yeah.
But there's another interesting thing on this document.
More interesting than that?
Much more interesting than that, which I've been meaning to show you. So this section is headed ablations, and within the ablations we've got this one here, and in ablation. You can see the and there, in ablation. This word is nuptia.
Is that where nuptials come from?
Yes, nuptial, Latin for wedding, for marriage. Now, who is getting married? We have the daughter of Jankin ap Thomas. So ap Thomas is the Welsh form for Thompson. So it would be Jenkin Thompson in today's language. 3 shillings, that's the Roman numeral, so 3 shillings, 4 pence.
I know Harriet and Rupert, the owners, will be thrilled because they actually still use the chapel for weddings.
Do they still charge 3 shillings and 4 pence?
Despite a wealth of documentary evidence, there's nothing tangible in the ground. And to dampen spirits still further, it's starting to rain.
I thought we'd got a medieval stone building here.
Yeah.
But by the looks of it, you're going to tell me it's not.
No, yesterday when we came across this stone wall, we thought, great, stone, old. We've got the bricks over there, that must be later. We've dug down the side here, you can see those stones are built on several courses of bricks. And the base of it all, which we've got going across this whole 5x5 building, is what looks to me as, a kind of 18th, 19th century cobbled surface that you would get in a stable or something like that.
Yeah. Stuart won't want to hear that. Just don't say that.
And you've got that kind of brick indent at that end as well. Is that contemporary with the cobble?
It seems to be built into the cobbles and up against the brick there. And to me that looks like a drain or something utilitarian there, like animal processing. I don't know, it's something, a farmyard building or something like that.
But you're saying it's got plaster on the walls?
Yeah, that's kind of the one spanner in the works. We had white wall plaster against some of those bricks there. It's kind of being held in place by the rubble, so we know it was against those bricks and that stone. Loads of it had come off down there, so this room is definitely plastered with quite decent white plaster.
But is it definitely no signs of any moulded plaster, just plain plaster?
No painting, no decoration, nothing like that.
Yeah.
But this building, whatever it is then, is on the outside of that wall that continues through, and goes round. So you're saying this is probably parkland with a building on the edge of that parkland wall.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
An 18th century building up against a garden wall doesn't get us any nearer to our medieval preceptory.
We're struggling.
We are, indeed.
This is just so frustrating. I mean, we had evidence like this stone sarcophagus, which obviously held one of our hospitallers. I mean, we know where they died, but we know so little about where and how they lived.
Confusion reigns in Trench 4. The void they found earlier lines up with what looked on the geophys like a conduit to take water out of a building towards the river. But underneath the flagstones, Chris has discovered a cobbled surface.
Could it be a dovecot?
No, we don't need water in a dovecot.
Don't need water in a dovecot,
No.
right, so let's park that
Get rid of the
one.
dovecot.
Let's park that one for the minute. Could it be something like a small mill?
Well, there is a mill mentioned, isn't there, in some of the deeds?
We'd expect a mill to have water flowing to it,
a
managed leach system.
Yeah.
I don't really buy the mill because we're high up. Getting water up here is difficult. You need to manage it. It'll be flowing through the...
It's very small as well.
And it's small. So
yeah.
I would park the mill as well for a minute. So that leaves us with a third option. Could it be something like a garderobe going with the hall, where you've got an external building where, to some extent, you've got other material feeding into and then away? Is that a possibility?
Of course it's a possibility, but if you're saying it can't be a mill, because you haven't got the flowing water. Then a garderobe, you'd want flowing water.
I mean, these are the three options.
Yeah.
None of them actually
work.
That's what I'm trying to say. None of them actually tell us what the building is, I don't think.
Chris, what do you think it is? Because these two haven't got a clue.
These three haven't got a clue.
I'm admitting I haven't, but I'm not an archaeologist.
So, I was convinced that that was draining water underneath this for some purpose, until we removed these stones. And now we've come down onto these cobbles, which means that nothing is going through these stones into that. The only thing I'm wondering is this is some kind of wooden structure on top of the stones, a gatehouse, a tower, a something that makes sense, and the water has to run underneath it.
This theory ties in with what seems to be an entranceway to the enclosure, visible both in the geophys and in the landscape. In the test pits, spirits are high, despite the soggy conditions.
I think there's another one of that dark reddy brick there, though.
It's slightly more burnt brick, isn't it?
This is exciting for hours, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're finding lots of brick and rubble in the fill of the moat.
That one.
Yeah, it may as well go with the 1338 visitation.
Helen has suggested 3 more finds for the virtual museum, including the spindle well we found on day 1.
This is a lead spindle well, and I'm particularly fond of these ones. They're cast and decorated with these blobs and ridges on them.
It's interesting because it's decorated, isn't it? And yet they're functional things, aren't they? And they're quite small.
But it doesn't feel to me like a classic monastic find, because everybody always associates spinning with women. So we have the word spinster, meaning a woman who spins. This is the thing that is on the end of what's called a drop spindle. It's a stick, and you weight it on the bottom, and you set it spinning. That's the flywheel kind of thing, and you drop it, and then it twists your thread. So these are used constantly every day, and so they get lost and dropped. They're very rare on archaeological sites. It's an amazing find.
The find suggests not only that there were women working on the site, but also that some of the income for the preceptory might have been derived from the wool industry.
This next one is the silver penny. It's a much more monastic kind of find. You can see that it's got this long cross that reaches right to the edge, and this was a way of combating clipping. But the thing I like about this so much is that the preceptory here is here to extract money and funnel it out to the Crusades and the pilgrims in the Mediterranean. And this was the only form of money at that time. Maybe some of it went as goods, but very few. I mean, this is how you transfer your movable wealth.
But we can put it into our timeline.
We can put it into our timeline, because Edward II is 1307 to 1327, so it's just a little bit before we put the spindle whirl in. Now, the third one that I want to put in the timeline is the coffin plate, because it says of Holston. And we knew that, but luckily down here we've got a bit more. We've got this line here, which is the bottom of the figure 1, number 1. Then that's a 7. That is a 9 with a curly tail. And then we've got a curve there. So it's a date in the 1790s. So I combed through the family trees. It's too early to be Mad Jack, but his father, also called John, dies in 1798. So I'm pretty, like 99.9% certain that this is the coffin of Mad Jack's father.
So on this coffin, next to Mad Jack's father, there is a brown, soft, fuzzy, inch-deep thing.
It's draped over the coffin in the way that a flag might be draped over a coffin, but it's definitely not a flag. It looks like a fur. It looks like a pelt, and it is big. It's almost human-sized. And so we did wonder if that might be the remains of the pet bear, because there is a rumour that he was buried with his bear. He does seem to have taken his bear all sorts of places. He was known for riding his bear, and his bear was known for biting him.
Although he died in a debtor's prison in Southwark, Mad Jack is said to be buried in the private chapel at Halston with his bear. His eccentricities ran from setting himself on fire to cure a case of hiccups, to hunting naked. His favourite horse had free range of Halston Hall, as did 2,000 dogs, some of whom were fed on champagne and steak. His coffin plate will accompany the coin and the spindle whorl in the virtual museum, alongside a metal detecting find that could just be from Mad Jack's horse.
It's a bridle fitting, so there may well have been a matching one for the other side. It's quite green looking.
And now Danny's identified a find that might just come from Mad Jack's horse. And Matt's whitewashed possible stable in Trench 1 might have dated to Mad Jack's era too, along with a vast array of animal bones.
So these have all just come from inside this burrow?
Inside this burrow. So what do we think this is? Is it a cellar or a vault? Have we got any idea?
No, we're not really sure.
We're not sure, but I mean, this is fantastic. So we've got, because yesterday at the end of the day you had an entire sheep skull, and then, but look at all these bird bones. Lots of different sizes, but look at this really cute little skull. It's got massive eyes, big old eyes. I think you found Tweety Pie.
All the features in this trench appear to be post-medieval, after the Preceptory had gone out of existence. But there's a potential twist to the tale. At the chapel end of the trench, where we thought we'd reached the natural bedrock, below the Archaeology, James has found a seam of charcoal, what might be a post hole, potentially belonging to an earlier phase of the building.
It's chunky charcoal, you know, it makes me happy. And it doesn't take a lot to make me happy.
The more I dig it, the more I'm convinced there's a shape.
Mm-hmm.
There's a shape to it.
Yeah.
And it's sealed as well under this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's obviously much earlier than anything up here,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. So you can't see any cut further up.
And this is why I'm thinking that actually, so far across the whole site, this might be the magic section that I'm looking for.
And charcoal like this might be able to give us more than just a date.
And what about that?
Ah, it looks like a stone, but it's not. It is charcoal. And what's nice when you get charcoal like this, you can work out the species of trees, obviously, that the charcoal was being used for.
As we reach the last hour or so of the dig, there's one final push in Trench 4 to get into some solid medieval archaeology.
Okay, we'll keep going, because this ditch is going underneath the stone structure, so whatever we get in this is going to predate the stone structure and will give us some idea of how old it is. No pressure, of course, but just any tightly dated coins you can get.
Some of the wooden beams in the chapel have been dated to the 1430s using dendrochronology, a technique whereby the annual growth rings of the tree are counted. But until now, Richard hasn't been convinced that this was giving us an accurate date.
Looking at it more closely, and especially having gone to the gallery this morning, I think I'm getting happier with it being closer to that dendro date. And you're looking at some details now, like the details of the window mullions, not the glass, but the mullions. They are a kind of medieval profile, compared to the ones under the gallery, which are later windows, and they've got very much a 17th century profile. So it's making sense, and I'm getting happier.
Does what you've seen in any way tell you what type of building this is?
Everything says chapel. It can't be a hall, because although we've got a south door now, we've got no answering north door, so you haven't got this kind of cross-passage hall. There's no sign it ever had a first floor in it, so it's not a service wing or anything like that. It's too grand to be a barn.
Right.
So I think it's always been a chapel.
It's quite staggering for me, this being here listening to this, because we come looking for a Knights Hospitalis Preceptory, and we're looking for evidence in trenches and everything else, but now to know we're standing in a building, or a good part of a building, that was here when the Preceptory had its life. It's really thrilling to hear that. Actually.
Yeah, but was it the Preceptory chapel, or was it a chapel for the manorial tenants? And if it was the Preceptory chapel, why is it timber framed and not stone? And if this was built in, even if it was built in 1430s, there must have been a chapel before that.
So what happened to that one?
As ever, more questions than answers. But we can say that the chapel stood here in the mid-15th century when a famous knight called John Langstrother was preceptor. He had fought in the first siege of Rhodes before serving as Treasurer of England under Henry VI. He was executed by Edward IV after the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471 and is pictured in this manuscript awaiting his death.
Chris, that shape there, to me, that looks like the top of a light of a window.
Okay.
Or a loop, possibly with a cusp coming here.
And in true Time Team fashion, just as we're losing all hope of finding anything really solid from the medieval preceptory, Richard spots something wedged in the flagstone floor.
It is big, it's a big chunky lintel, yeah. So Chris, what we're hoping to find, if that is a single light with a round head like that, then that could go back into the 12th, 13th century. But if this is a cusp there, then it's going to be slightly later.
Okay.
And then a lot depends on how big that stone is to see whether this is part of a single light window or one with 2 or 3 lights. So it's all down to you.
Thanks.
This could be a hugely important piece of the puzzle as we draw together what we've learned. Our test pits show that outside the enclosure, the land was probably orchards and parkland. And Corenza and Danny are trying to work out what they are telling us about what went on inside the enclosure.
So this is the only test pit that's produced any substantial amount of medieval pottery at all. And we've got these quite big sherds, which I was found when they came out of the ground.
Really, aren't
they're
they?
big and they're so sharp at the edge, they haven't gone any distance. So I think they're quite near to where they were used.
This ties in as well because this is medieval too. This is a bit of medieval ridge tile. So we've got the bit where it would have been crested, you know, kind of sat on top of the roof, and then you get these points, decorative points. Obviously gone now, but really fancy medieval ridge tile. It just goes to show how useful test pits are, and it was all found by our wonderful volunteers.
I know, and they'll be so pleased.
In terms of post-medieval stuff, we've got some really lovely bits of pottery here. So we've got this Tinglaze ware here, we've got a bit of Staffordshire ware pottery, and this we think might be the base of like perhaps a little coffee cup.
It feels to me like it's all sort of late 17th, 18th century stuff. It's like people walking out from the house on a picnic, and the servants have brought out the food and the wine, and they've got stuff on, you know, some of the nice plates, not the really posh, expensive gold and silverware, maybe.
We've also got, actually, this is from test pit 14, and this is a clay pipe bowl. So the stem would have gone along here, it's broken off there. This is where you'd put your tobacco and smoke it, but it has a stamp with it.
Right, so we can date it.
Mark. Yeah, and so we've actually been able to date it. So it's made by George Hartshorn in 1660 to 1680.
And actually, doesn't that fit as well? So again, there's that, you know, they're sitting, drinking, eating and smoking.
In the final moments of the day, Chris manages to lift the chunk of masonry that might just be part of the medieval story.
What this is looking like, Stuart, is some sort of curved head of a small, narrow window.
Yeah, the lancet window.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there any possibility that could be Saxon in date? I've seen lancet windows in very...
This is a fantastic find that takes us right back to the beginning of the story of the Preceptory at Holston.
I mean, it's just that shape. But that shape to me isn't natural, it's definitely man-made, so I think we do have a bit of medieval kit there at least.
Yeah.
If this is what he thinks it is, this piece of stone and the Saxon font could have come from the church that was here when the Knights Hospitallers were granted the land in 1190. So we're anxious to hear from Joe and Megan, our on-site Saxon experts.
Is it? So that width, you know, if that was consistent all the way through, I mean, that could be pre-conquest.
It'd be a very narrow window.
Yeah, perfect.
Nicely done.
This fantastic find is the last one for the shelves of our virtual museum. It takes us right back to the beginning of the story of the Preceptory here at Holston Hall. Over the last 3 days, Time Team has played the part of the medieval pilgrims and travellers that would have enjoyed the hospitality of the Knights of St. John. We too have come from far and wide and been guests here for just a few days in search of a different kind of truth and uncovering an extraordinary story.
Well, I wanted the foundations of a preceptory, and we've found these glorious stones and some magnificent finds, but also something that might suggest an earlier Anglo-Saxon story.
We've seen glimpses of a tale extending over 900 years. The Knights Hospitallers were gifted this land and the chapel in the 12th century. By 1338, the Preceptory at Holston had become an important property for the Order of St. John. And records tell us that somewhere on this site stood a dovecot, a hall, a tithe barn, and a chapel. During the 15th century, the chapel had a southern entrance. It was used not just by the Hospitallers, but also for weddings. Around this time, a bell tower was added. The dissolution signalled the end of the Preceptory, and the estate was passed into the hands of the Mittens. They built a new Halston Hall in 1690, and all that was left of the Preceptory was the old wooden chapel and the moat. In the 19th century, the eccentric Jack Mitten would have been seen hunting naked and partying in the landscape gardens. But his extravagant lifestyle led to his early death in prison, before being buried with his bear in the family crypt. His idea of hospitality was a far cry from that of the Knights of St. John that lived here before him.
And it feels only right, in true Hospitaller style, that we toast in local beer, Stewart.
Good health, Gus.
Cheers!
Cheers!
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses, and behind-the-scenes insights.